In our study of Philemon, the question has literally come to me about 6 or 7 times in conversations or email about the relationship between forgiveness and boundaries. That is, if I forgive somebody, do I have to reset everything in the relationship as though the problem never occurred? Some people even have threatened or sort of emotionally blackmailed, if you really forgave me, things would go back to the old normal. Is that biblical? Is that true? I think it's worth talking about, and we'll talk about it today on Beyond the Notes. As a teacher and preacher, sometimes it's fun to speculate about the questions that you bet people are asking, as in, well, I bet some of you wonder, or if I were you, I would be curious about. And so speculating about the question can be a fun and worthwhile exercise. But it's gold when actual questions come, and the questions are all sort of in orbit around this central idea. The question could be something like, and I'm not quoting any of the actual questions that I got because those questions were asked in private, and I'm going to leave them there. But the theme, if I forgive somebody for what they have done, and I truly and authentically forgive, am I obligated to reset the parameters of the relationship back to where they were before the incident, the infraction, the violation, before it occurred? Do I have to restore everything to status quo in order to demonstrate that I've actually forgiven? You know what? It's a great question, because you hear the cliche of forgive and forget. Well, if I've forgotten that you punched me in the nose, then I might set you up to punch me in the nose again. I forgive you for punching me. Am I therefore obligated to let you swing your fist near my face without restrictions in the future? Because after all, I've forgiven you for that time you broke my nose. The short answer, and I really shouldn't give you this, because once I give you the short answer, you can turn off the podcast and go do something else, and I'm not supposed to want you to do that. But I'm going to risk it and give you the short answer. No, you are not obligated to put everything back to the way it was. You just aren't. Back that up biblically, because it's very common in the culture for people who are forgiven to use the rhetoric of their having been forgiven to sort of blackmail an outcome. If you really forgive me, you've got to give me my job back. If you really forgive me, you've got to let me move back in. If you really forgive me, you've got to unrestrict me. Let me give you a broad theory to think about, and then I'll show you a few biblical examples with the time we have. If what you did to harm me was sin, suppose you stole something from me. You came into my house and you stole something, and I found out about it, and I confronted you, and I forgave you for your act of thievery. Even suppose that in the course of that conversation, in the course of that forgiveness, you gave the item back. There was a restoration of the infraction itself. It was dealt with. Am I then obligated to let you hang out in my house when I'm not around? See, I already know that you are prone, you're tempted to steal. Now, I forgive you for the time you stole. Wonderful if you've made it right. But I'm not going to go forward carrying the baggage of unforgiveness. I have released it. I have let it go. I have truly forgiven you. And you're not going to be in my house unsupervised, because I love you enough. This is why boundaries after forgiveness matter. I love you enough that I am not going to put you in the situation for you to sin again. I am going to put in place a guideline in our relationship that's going to protect you from an area where now you and I both know you could be tempted. So if you stole from me once because you had access to my house, I forgive you. You may not come back into my house. Well, if you really forgave me, you'd let me back in. It says who? Does that make sense? I hope it does. All right, biblically, let's look at some examples. There are 3 clear ones that I came up with. I suspect there are more. Let's go all the way back to the very beginning of beginnings. Let's go back to the book of Genesis. Adam and Eve live in the Garden of Eden. They have a restriction on eating the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They eat it anyway. God forgives them. He sacrifices an animal and he makes them skin coverings, and it's clear he forgives them. And they're kicked out of the Garden of Eden. They may no longer live in the Garden of Eden. Well, if God really forgave them, we'd all still live in the garden. No, God really did forgive them, and he forgave them at great cost. But he also removed them from the garden. See, there's complete forgiveness and a whole new boundary. Happened with, I would say, with Moses and the rock. In the story's told in Numbers chapter 20, where Moses struck the rock to bring forth water after God told him not to. And the water came out of the rock. And it's clear that Moses would go on from that time, and he would lead God's people successfully for years to come. He is still regarded as a high profile biblical leader. He's still a paradigm of what good leadership looks like. But because he struck that rock, for which God forgave him, he was not permitted to enter the promised land. That new restriction, you will lead the people to the edge of the promised land, but you won't go in. New boundary. Now, each of those have to do with relationships between people and God. What about a relationship between people and people? I'm glad you asked. In Acts 13, the Apostle Paul has recruited the team for his first missionary journey, and it's Paul and Barnabas and John Mark. They set out from Antioch of Syria, and they travel across a brief strait of the Mediterranean Sea. They evangelize on the island of Cyprus, and they work from east to west on Cyprus, and then from the west end of Cyprus, they sail north, and as they reach the shore of Asia Minor, the shore of modern Turkey, they're going to go on, Paul and Barnabas are going to go on over the Taurus Mountains and into the inland plain to plant churches there, the churches of Paul's first missionary journey. But if you recall from Acts 13, John Mark quit and went home. We don't have a lot of details about why, but we have the fact that he quit and went home. Hold that. Couple of years later, couple of Bible chapters later, at the last paragraph of Acts 15, Barnabas comes back to Paul to suggest what becomes the second missionary journey. And Acts 15, beginning in verse 36. After some days, Paul said to Barnabas, Paul initiates it. Paul said to Barnabas, let us return and visit the brothers in every city where we proclaim the word of the Lord and see how they are. Let's revisit the churches of the first missionary journey up in Asia Minor. Now, Barnabas wanted to take with them John called Mark. But Paul thought best not to take with them one who had withdrawn from them in Pamphylia and had not gone with them to the work. And by the way, the Bible says there arose a sharp disagreement. Paul and Barnabas did not agree on handling John Mark. Now, from other places, we know that John Mark and Barnabas were cousins, and we know that Barnabas is an inveterate encourager. Everything with Barnabas is always about, hey, come on, let's do this, the encouragement personality. Paul, understanding the theology of grace as well as he did, there's no way Paul has not forgiven John Mark. In fact, later, in Paul's later writing, I won't chase the rabbit now, but there's evidence of complete, even functional restoration. But at this moment, the great apostle Paul, who wrote so eloquently about the gospel, who understood the principle of forgiveness, said, you know what? I'm not taking John Mark with me again because John Mark quit on me one time. A new boundary in place on John Mark's service. So here's the takeaway. you are obligated to forgive. Forgiveness means you let go of the emotional and practical debt the person owes you and you set it down. You accept that the harm that has been done, whether made right or not, you're letting go your claims to the high ground and the grudge and the bitterness. You're releasing all of that because of what Christ has forgiven you. That's the forgiveness part. But you don't have to set everything back to an old status quo. Again, my example, I can forgive you for stealing something from my house. And I truly would. Please don't, but I truly would. But I'm not going to let you in my house again. At least not for a long time to come. So, forgive, forgive, forgive. But you might be helping someone not sin if after you forgive, you see to it that healthy boundaries are and remain in place. It's biblical, it's very practical, and it's an answer to a question people were actually asking me, which I'm really, really honored to have. God bless you. By now, I hope you are liking and sharing and subscribing to various things on the McGregor podcast channel. These things are here for you, and it's our joy to share with you. We'll look forward to being with you again on the next episode of Beyond the Notes.